right, jumping right into some Eastern Michigan football. So they lose a lot of returning production from last year's offense. Kind of starts at the quarterback position where last year's starter, Austin Smith, has moved on to Austin P. But they do bring in former Mac Foe and Buffalo starter Cole Snyder, as well as return Ike Ndegwu III. Kind of how did that competition shape up in spring? How did those two guys look?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I don't think there is a competition. Cole Snyder is going to be the starter on this team, and it's the reason they brought him over from Buffalo. As I understand it, Buffalo told Cole Snyder, but going into the offseason, they were going to recruit some guys, and they wanted him to compete this year. And he thought, listen, I've thrown for over 5,000 yards in the last 2 seasons. I don't know what else I can show you. So he went into the portal. Eastern Michigan got him. He's played great football in the spring, and really – he's the one guy Eastern Michigan has that has game experience and really can manage Chris Creighton's offense. Ike Ndegwu, he got in 4 games last year, didn't go well. He was 13 of 31, threw a couple interceptions, didn't have any touchdown passes, really struggled throwing the football. He was on the depth chart in spring ball. He was 3rd on the depth chart, but he's a guy that's a very talented quarterback room. So it's going to be hard for Ndegwu to get back on the field. Cole Snyder is exactly who EMU wants to go into those first 2 tough road games. You open at UMass against Don Brown and what will be a tough defense at UMass. Then the next week you fly across the country to Seattle to take on a Washington Huskies team that, last year they were decent. I know they lost some people, but that's a tough road game.
They lost a lot of people.
A ton of people. And that's, Kalen DeBoer was the offensive coordinator at Eastern Michigan under Chris Creighton. So they had a relationship, and that's not why that game was scheduled. But we thought, all right, Eastern Michigan's going to go to Washington. If nothing else, if DeBoer keeps that team, maybe they'll be nice enough to not run us out of the stadium with a team that went to the national title game. But now DeBoer's gone. Everything's blown up. So it'll be interesting because Chris Creighton is from back that way. So that'll be an important game to him. You guys know as well as anybody, he gets fired up for those Power 5 games and has a lot of Power 5 wins. So it'll be interesting.
Absolutely.
And come next year, that UMass game is a conference game, right?
Correct.
What?
Yeah. So they come into that 2025 season in conference play. It'll be interesting because the conference just got away from having divisions and went to pods. So Eastern Michigan is in a schedule pod with Western Michigan and Central Michigan, meaning those are the only 2 guaranteed two teams in the conference you would play every year. So UMass is going to curveball that a little bit. But the thinking behind the scheduling and losing the conferences was you play everybody home and away at least once in a 3-year period. So you get a better rotation of playing around the conference. I've been here since 2019. I've never called a game in Ohio. So we are playing at Athens, Ohio this year. So it'll be interesting to see what they do with the scheduling. But Amherst is not easy to get to either. So it'll be really interesting, especially for basketball when they travel out that way. So welcome UMass. They were in the conference before. They're back. So it'll be interesting.
Trying to read between the lines here when you're talking about the quarterbacks. So my assumption, and maybe it's wrong, is that maybe Minnesota transfer Drew Viotto is the number 2 quarterback coming out of spring.
So Jeremiah Salem was on the depth chart at number 2. He's a guy we had last year that can really sling the rock. And this is a guy that all the receivers in the offense love this guy. His grandfather played on the national championship team at Minnesota back in the day, was the backup quarterback there. Jeremiah is the guy that the receivers at Pro Day asked to come out and throw to him. That's how good a thrower he is. He can really zip the ball. So he was number 2 on the depth chart. But you mentioned Drew Viotto. He's a guy that's a transfer from the University of Minnesota. He's had a good spring. But as you look at the way the quarterbacks will line up, Cole Snyder has the experience. That's who they need at quarterback to get them out of the gate. Now, Chris Creighton will be the first guy to tell you he has never gone through a football season with one quarterback. One inevitably gets hurt, and you got to put a second one in there. How that will line up behind Cole Snyder is anybody's guess. But Jeremiah Salem, tremendous quarterback. Drew Viotto, the transfer from Minnesota, another great quarterback, but has never played in a college game, never got a snap at Minnesota. Jay Stuckey is a freshman they brought in. In fact, they brought him onto the team at the bowl game last year. He actually practiced the day before the bowl game. He couldn't be in uniform down there in Mobile, but he was with the team. He's had a good spring, and the guy can run. He busted off a 65-yard touchdown run in the spring game, so that the kid can scoot. It's the most talented group of quarterbacks I've seen in one room since I arrived on campus in 2019. So a lot of good arms there.
So moving on to the running game, another question mark for this offense. They lose the top 3 rushers from a year ago, and Samson Evans to graduation. Jalen Jackson goes to Iowa State. The aforementioned Austin Smith. But not all hope is lost. They do bring in Delbert Mims III from NC State, and Bryson Moss returns. How did that running back room look this spring?
So the running back room is going to be interesting. You mentioned Mims, who's the transfer from North Carolina State. And I think sometimes when you hear a transfer coming from a power school, you get excited about it. But Mims was not on the depth chart in the spring game. He was not one of the top 2 running backs. Chris Creighton is going to be limited. How much, they were limited a little bit in the spring. He tried to lay off the contact a little bit. Eastern Michigan is redoing the turf in their stadium. They're going to have a brand new field in 2024. That old turf was hard. They did do a little practice in the bubble. They even got out on the grass one time, I think. But they didn't do a ton of contact. They had a couple scrimmages. So when you look at the running back situation, it's kind of hard to get a real gauge on where they're going to be back running-wise. Mims, as I mentioned, was not on the depth chart for the spring game. Dante McMillan, who played in a couple games last year and handled some kick returns, he was number 1 on the depth chart. Elijah Jackson Anderson, who played a little bit last year too. Those were the 2 top backs, but nobody really exploded in camp. And you thought to yourself, all right, these are the guys that are going to be the running backs. So it's going to be interesting to see how that position unfolds as they move towards fall camp. Do
you think McMillan, snap 1, game 1, he's the back that's first out there?
I think it's anybody's job. I think it's going to be a competition in through the fall, and I think Eastern Michigan's not done shopping. I think, with the portal open, they're always looking to try and improve themselves in different positions. And if somebody pops up running back wise that they think can improve them in that backfield, I think they're going to go for it.
So last season, Eastern Michigan seemed to take this committee approach with the running back room. Do you expect that heavy rotation again here in 2024, or do you think they'll have that quote unquote workhorse back?
Well, I wouldn't say they necessarily went by committee last year. It looks like that statistically, but really Samson Evans was supposed to be the primary back in that offense. He had a tremendous season the year before, but as he came into last season, he really had some knee issues, and he had a game the year before against Arizona State where he ran for well over 200 yards and helped Eastern Michigan beat the Sun Devils. But almost from that point, knee issues started to flare up. So all last year, his knees were a problem. So they really relied on Jalen Jackson and Samson Evans and used them together as if they were one back. Short yardage situations, Evans was in there, never got knocked backwards. He's a guy, you need 2 or 3 yards. It was Samson Evans. Jalen Jackson was a guy that when he got loose out in the open field, he was a real problem for defenses. I think if Chris Creighton had a primary back that he liked, he'd leave them there as much as possible. But if you have one guy that's good at pass protection, one guy that's good at receiving the football, one guy that's that really, north-south runner, then he'll use a combination of running backs to get that job done. So it'll be interesting to see how that position race unfolds and really who they want to go with, because I really get the feeling that Eastern Michigan wants to run the football quite a bit in this upcoming season. So that's going to be one to watch.
One quick thing I wanted to ask you. You said they're redoing the field, so is it going to still be gray, or is the color changing?
The actual playing surface will still be gray. Max Crosby stroked a check for the new turf, so they had visited with him out in Las Vegas, and Max Crosby's had a wonderful career, had a great career at Eastern Michigan. He's only 26 years old, but he's hit it big, and so it'll be Max Crosby Field in the upcoming season. But what they've done too is Eastern Michigan had that track going around the field. They've ripped out the track and they're basically turfing all the way to the stands on both sides. So this will be this huge ocean of green out there with that gray field in the middle. So the gray stays. As long as Chris Creighton is here, I think the field's going to remain gray. And I'm sure you guys know the story of why it's gray.
We don't.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's cool. It's cool to look at for sure.
Well, on TV, I feel like the TV's broken when I'm looking at it.
Well, it looks like a black and white game when you watch, for sure.
It does. And sometimes, like Eastern was playing Buffalo one year, and Buffalo was wearing gray uniforms with a blue helmet, and we had on like whites with a gray helmet. I was like, it looks like the TV's broken. But here's why the field is gray. Chris Creighton got here in 2014, and during one of the early spring practices, it started to snow a little bit, and some players were kind of griping about the weather. And Chris Creighton said, listen, this is a new era, and I don't care what kind of weather we play in or where we play somebody. I don't care if it's in a parking lot with broken glass. We're going to bring it. Then he got the idea, let's play in a parking lot. So that's why it's gray. It's supposed to be a parking lot there at the factory, and it's parking lot gray, and that's going to be the color as long as Chris Creighton is running the show at the factory.
I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think you'll have to worry about gray uniforms on a gray turf anymore. Because I feel like the NCAA recently passed a rule where you can't wear whatever color the turf is. You can't wear the same color. That's what I thought, but I could be.
It was originally like a Boise State rule. Boise State was wearing blue on blue turf, and I think the Mountain West Conference was giving them some grief about that. But finally, they said you can wear blue on blue. We wore gray on the gray, so it's funny when you're at the game and the field doesn't consume your whole field of vision. You don't really notice it that much. It doesn't, right. The uniforms pop a little more. It's when you're watching it just on TV that you're like, something seems a little off with this TV. But they're sticking with the gray, so the playing surface will still be gray.
All right, getting back to some football here. In 2023, the passing game seemed to struggle a little bit, and they're also faced with replacing leading wide receiver Tanner Canoe and third leading wide receiver Hamza El-Zayat. They do bring in some transfer help. They bring in Porter Rooks from NC State, Tyler Walton from McFo, Ohio, and then J.B. Mitchell III also returns as well. What can you tell us about that wide receiver room?
I can tell you that nobody really shined in spring ball. I think it was a bit of a question mark. J.B. Mitchell was a little banged up this spring, so we didn't see a whole lot of him. As for the rest of the receiving corps, nobody really stood out. This is an area EMU may try and address before fall camp. You mentioned Porter Rooks from North Carolina State. He hasn't earned the starting job yet. He was listed second on the depth chart behind Tyler Lockett, who was a transfer from Michigan State a year ago. And Tyler Walton from Ohio is another guy you mentioned. He wasn't listed on the depth chart at all. Now, they brought in a new receiving coach in Grant Hurd. He had previously coached at Central Florida. He had worked at Indiana under Allen's staff there. And watching him in practices, you can tell he's been a little frustrated in the early going with this receiving corps. A lot of drop passes out there. He demands excellent at that wide receiver position, and we just didn't see anybody make a great separation over those 15 days of practice that you would think to yourself, all right, here's your 1, 2, and 3 guys in a passing formation. So that's one. That competition is going to continue right up till game day.
I assume the answer to this question is yes, just because Cole Snyder's there. But I would assume you expect some improved production from the passing game in 2024.
Yeah, and that's why I expect some improved passing production, because the quarterback room last year really struggled to get the ball to the wide receivers. Alex Smith got injured a couple times. Aiku Dingwu came in. He had trouble getting the ball to receivers. Cameron McCoy, who's also a pitcher on the Eastern Michigan team, and I think has decided that he's just going to stay with baseball, also struggled to throw the football. So Tanner Canoe, Hamza El-Zayat, great wide receivers. They had a fantastic pro day, and it's very possible that some NFL teams might invite them into a rookie camp. We're great wide receivers with quarterbacks who struggle to get them the ball. This year, it's almost flipped. You got great quarterbacks and receivers that need to do a better job of catching the football. But I don't think the passing game has anywhere to go but up. So Cole Snyder will lead that charge. So I do think you'll see an improved passing game out of Eastern Michigan.
So if there's some opportunity for growth there in the wide receiver room, do you think that the tight end group will be utilized more in the passing game, or will it be similar to what it was in 2023?
I don't think a Chris Creighton offense really lends itself a ton to the tight ends. In fact, I went back and looked at their stats, and and Jerry Getzinger and Blake Daniels between them averaged about a touch a game. So they didn't get a lot of balls. It was probably, I think Daniels had 13 receptions. Jerry Getzinger had 16 receptions. Now that may have changed if Andreas Posca had stayed healthy all season. He injured his knee early in the season on special teams play, and he's a guy that has since transferred to Arkansas. So Getzinger and Daniels are back. They like good blocking tight ends. Those guys can handle that chore. As far as, a receiver that's going to bust off 5-6 catches a game, it just hasn't been the thing. Maybe that's another thing that changes with Cole Snyder, but I don't expect a huge ramped up difference out of the tight ends for Eastern Michigan.
Can you tell us a little bit about how Florida transfer Jonathan Odom looked?
Remains to be seen. He's behind those two guys on the depth chart. Didn't really do anything that I saw to separate himself depth chart wise in the spring. So that's kind of a wait and see thing. That's another one too. You get a guy, he's coming from Florida.
Right,
He's going to be a big difference maker, but it's still, it's still Division I football. And sometimes you got to have your head on straight and realize what you're getting yourself into. And I think he could be fantastic for Eastern Michigan, but so far I haven't seen that giant separation. Again, on the depth, he wasn't even on the depth chart for the spring game. It was Getzinger and Daniels.
Much like the rest of the offense, they do lose some offensive line production with Alex Howie and Brian Dooley graduating and Zach Conte transferring. What did they do to kind of shore up that offensive line this spring? And, how did they look in general?
Offensive line is coming along. They got pushed around a little bit by the defense in spring ball, but at center, they got a couple guys who played some last year in Broderick Roman and Carson Lee. Carson Lee's a kid out of the Denver area that he's got legs like redwood trees. I mean, the guy is strong for sure. And he did a lot of training with Drake Nugent, who was the starting center for Michigan this past season. That'll be going to the NFL draft. The two of them are from the same area in Colorado and worked out with a guy named Matt McChesney, who used to play college ball at Colorado and then played in the NFL for a while. So Lee's got a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge behind him, so he'll be good in that center position. Left guard might be where they're in the best shape. Mickey Revolinsky should start there. Has had a lot of playing experience. Chris Mayo is going to be out there at left tackle. He was a backup last season. And then the right side of the line has some position battles going on that will probably go into fall camp. But all in all, if that offensive line can mesh and they get some guys that had a little bit of experience this year to really come out of the gate strong this season, it could be a high point for him. Could be.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season here in 2024, who would that be for Eastern Michigan?
If I had to pick an offensive player, I might go with a lineman, Doji Dehue. He's 6'9", 295 out of West Africa. I don't know how many times you've heard that. He's only played football for 2 years at Santa Rosa Junior College, but he has a huge frame. He has a lot of talent. He's raw on that offensive line, but his dad is from West Africa. His mom is from France. I had a chance to meet the two of them. They came to a spring practice, and I said, how does a kid in West Africa end up playing football in the United States? And they said he came to us and said, I want to play football in the United States and play in the NFL. And so he came over to the U.S., 2 years of junior college ball. He got a lot of looks. He made a visit to Eastern Michigan, absolutely fell in love with Ypsilanti and the campus, and he called his folks and said, this feels like home. So his parents made the 24-hour trip or something from West Africa to come out, watch practice and watch a live scrimmage. And so he's a guy that could really pop for him on the offensive line and end up being a big piece for him.
Do you think you said he's raw. Do you think he excels more in the running or passing game?
I think for him, the running game so far, the passing game takes a little more technique and stepping back and being good on your feet like that. Running game wise, he's just such an imposing figure. I like when I'm standing out at practice, I can look across the field and I can see his entire head above everybody else. My son's works with the athletic training staff at Eastern Michigan. He's a student there, and he goes, I think he's 7 foot, Dad. I mean, he's so big. And but he's fun to watch. A couple false starts here or there that in the spring ball, but he's adjusting well. So I'll be curious to see how it plays out for him.